In this video, we're going to have a look at why I chose Panasonic Lumix GH7 instead of the Canon R5 Mark II. Now, you might think that it's a weird comparison as the price difference is enormous, but by the end of the video, you're going to find out why I compared these two specific cameras and why I chose the Lumix. Now, a very quick backstory here. I used to use Canon cameras. Well, I've used Sony, Canon, Panasonic. I don't really care what brand I'm using as long as it's the kind of perfect match for me. And the best camera, or the camera that I have been most happy with, is the Canon 1DX Mark II. It was a workhorse, it never overheated, shot 4K in 4K. It shot 24 frames per second in 4K, slow motion 120 in HD. That was fine for the moment. But when it was time to upgrade my Canon 1DX Mark II, I was looking into the GH6 because of the video features, especially shooting in ProRes, because that is my preferred codec by far, because it's very easy to edit that codec on your computer. Furthermore, the stabilizer on the GH6 is probably the best one, well, was the best one available at the moment. And I also love the concept that you could shoot with anamorphic lenses and de-squeeze it internally in the GH6. But I hated the GH6 because of the autofocus, and I needed to change that camera. So I was looking into the Canon R5 Mark II. So when I was looking for a new camera, I was actually excited to go back to Canon for two reasons. I love Canon cameras, and as I mentioned, the 1DX Mark II, I have only good memories from that camera. So I was super excited when Canon announced their R5 Mark II. But then I started to check out the specifications, which were not mind-blowing, to put it like that. Oh, and the second reason, that's a very personal one, and you might call it a little bit selfish, but I do know that Canon is like, how much of the markets do they have? Well, they have like 40% of the market, and I do know that if I had used a Canon camera on this channel, I would have had a higher subscriber count, or more followers, more subscribers. So it kind of hurts me to not use Canon cameras, but again, I want to use the best camera for my usage. So, specifications of the R5 Mark II. That did not impress me too much. The 8K, okay, 8K, who the hell needs 8K? Let's be honest, especially in a hybrid mirrorless camera. If you need 8K, I do reckon that you are better off getting yourself a cinema camera. If you can't afford a cinema camera, but you are in a, you know, you have a commercial shoot or something like that, that you do need to have very high quality, rent it. Don't buy the R5 Mark II because of the 8K capability. Furthermore, the record limits is not unlimited. Overheating, we're going to talk about that in a minute, which is, yeah, let's come back to that in a minute, because that, yeah. The video specifications in general on the Canon R5 Mark II seemed promising. Of course, if you shoot RAW, the bitrate is fantastic. I think it's like 2.5 or 2,600 megabits per second, which is insanely high. So you will get a very good quality image from the sensor, which is also 45 megapixels, but that is also its downfall because of the overheating. So let's get back to that soon. But then I got to the 4K options on the R5 Mark II, and because that is basically the format that I will use on this channel, and if I decide to do some commercial work, I will probably shoot in 4K and not higher, because the client in 2024, 2025, they usually don't need it anyway. I do understand the concept of 8K, you can zoom in interviews and stuff like that, but the camera will overheat. I'm not going to mention that again. Or am I? The 4K option on the R5 Mark II is not ideal because it is not oversampled, it is line skipping. So the problem with the 4K image not being oversampled is the image tends to be a little bit softer when it's not oversampled but line skipped. And the weird thing is that Canon has offered oversampling since 2020 actually with the Canon 1DX Mark III. So why are they not offering it in this camera? Another thing that is not surprising, but it is not shooting in ProRes, and ProRes is a dream to work with. I do know that you have all intra options on the R5 Mark II, and if you want to record in ProRes, you have to then record externally, and that is something that I do not want to do neither. I want it to be all internal in my camera. It does shoot 120 frames per second, so 120 in 4K and 240 in HD, which is the same as the Lumix camera. Nor is there an option of having anamorphic D-squeeze on the R5 Mark II, which is a shame, because if you do want to use this camera in a slightly bigger production, you might use anamorphic lenses. And if you don't have the D-squeeze internally in the camera and you don't take advantage of the full sensor when you're using anamorphic lenses, I mean, of course you can D-squeeze it in post, but again, having it in the GH7 is a dream, as I also had it in the GH6. So that was another thing that I was thinking, well, that's another reason not to go for the Canon R5 Mark II. Now, I'm not comparing the GH7 to a more similarly priced the Canon R6 Mark II, because the video capabilities of that camera are not good enough. They're fine for hobby use and stuff like that, but I would not use a camera that can only shoot long up, or in this case they call it IPB, because it's not good for editing. The computer will struggle with that if you shoot in 4K, and the bitrate when shooting in 24 frames per second is 170 megabits per second, which is again not acceptable. So that's why I compared the Lumix GH7 to the Canon R5 Mark II. Now, the main reason why I did not get the Canon R5 Mark II was when I saw the external battery grip with the fan. For me, that was just a big concern, because they're already between the lines saying this camera will overheat. And after seeing some initial reviews on YouTube, you can see that that is true. And that is something that I cannot use, as I have had cameras in the past that has overheated. And when you're on a professional shoot and your camera starts overheating, there is absolutely nothing worse than that happening, because you can't just change the battery and continue. You're kind of effed. Also, pricing that grip $400, and the total cost for the R5 Mark II is then $3,700. Now it's getting quite expensive. No, $4,700 obviously. And even if you have this battery grip, they even say that if you shoot for a longer period of time, the fan will get noisy, actually so noisy that the microphone might pick that up. Again, that is something that is not acceptable. Instead of having 8K, just, you know, offer 6K and maybe the camera wouldn't overheat. I'm not an expert, but maybe that would help. And furthermore, slice it by $1,000. When the R5 one was released, I think it was 3009. They should have kept it at 3009. It is a photography camera first and video second. It makes no sense to have the video features that they do because the camera is not built to make videos. Sorry. Now, my initial thoughts on the GH7 was a little bit alarming because the autofocus was not fantastically good. I was doubting if I actually wanted to keep my GH7. Check out that one.